All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this webinar this afternoon. We've got a brilliant case study for you today from Sharon Mossman at Newcastle University. He's going to be talking about adapt and adopt making ITIL work for you. And really to explain a little bit about some of the things that they've done there at the IT service at Newcastle University and the way that that's fitted in with other frameworks and other approaches such as SDIs, best practice standards and things like that. So welcome, Sharon. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, Zoe.
It's great to have you here, and I know that this is something that you've shared in a previous webinar, I think, and you've spoken about a bit in the past. So it would be really great to have some listeners' questions as well. So anyone listening, if you post your questions throughout Sharon's presentation, what we'll do is we'll come to those at the end, and you can get some really specific hints and tips, hopefully, on how you can help to kind of apply some of the things we'll be hearing about today. After Sharon, we'll be having a short presentation also from Andy from LANDESK, who will be talking a little bit about continual service improvement. So we'll introduce him after Sharon's presentation. So Sharon, without further ado, I'll hand over to you. And as I say, we'll come to questions at the end. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Zoe. And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our experience in Newcastle University with to ITIL and the bits that we chose to adapt and adopt and how we integrated that with our roadmap and our plans for improvement. I'll just start with a little bit about me. I'm responsible for 3 teams in Newcastle University. And it's interesting in the role of implementing ITIL processes in that I'm responsible for the service process team who's responsible for doing that, but I'm also manager of the IT service desk and our other frontline customer service team, the cluster room support team. And so I have about 21, 22 frontline support staff and a very small team, 3 people in the service process team who do the work on ITIL and maintain the system that we use for that. For context, Newcastle University are a member of the Russell Group. That's an association of the UK's leading research universities, and we have getting on for 30,000 internal customers, staff and students. But we also support other customers. So for example, prospective students, their parents, existing students' parents. We might have people who are called emeritus professors who were previously professors here but who have an IT account after they leave us, and their wives and husbands. And so we have a very diverse community of customers here. In the university, our main teaching and research activities are in Newcastle, but we have campuses in those other places as well. And we also have a presence across many other sites. For example, we have a research shipping vessel. We have farms, we have other research activities going on. So we have IT in many diverse places. We're a civic university and we have strong links with Newcastle, and we work closely with local businesses and with the local council. And we support those 3 societal challenge themes that I've mentioned on that slide. And a lot of our research underpins those themes. In the university, we have this vision and mission, and we're very conscious in the IT service that we're interested in making sure that we underpin the university's direction. And so we're very conscious of the mission critical nature of the IT services that we provide. And we're ever conscious of the university's vision and making sure that we work hard to help the university to deliver what it needs to deliver. In the IT service itself, we're around 220 people. Not very long ago, we were a disaggregated team. We had a central IT team of around 120 people, and we had faculty-based teams within the various schools of somewhere between 80 and 100 people. In the past 2 years, we've grouped all of our IT people together, and we've become a bigger service now. And we're in the process of integrating those various groups into one team. And at the moment we're about more than halfway through that integration piece, but it's a long process. I first started to work in the university in 2011, and when I came along I had the remit to improve the processes that we currently had in place and to build a roadmap for the other processes that we wanted to introduce. And it was pretty much a blank canvas at that point. Although the department had already made efforts to put some ITIL processes in place, and we did have a simple incident and major incident process, and we did have a draft for the service catalogue, the existing service management tool at that time had been very much heavily customised and had pretty much painted us into a corner, really. We weren't able to put into place the changes that we wanted to make to certain processes at that point. The incident and major incident processes were pretty much ticket logging processes at that time. We didn't really manage incidents in the way that ITIL suggests that we do, with the focus on having the thing fixed very quickly. We understood about logging a ticket and not forgetting to do the thing, but the urgency was variable, I would suggest. And we definitely missed opportunities to learn from experience from, for example, major incident reviews, which does help to improve the management of services moving forward. At that time, the service desk were very much at the bottom of the tree, and we didn't get consulted around changes of, in services. We didn't understand or weren't told about new services coming into play. Very often we'd come into work on a Monday morning and find that there'd been a piece of work done over the weekend that might have caused an outage, and we weren't aware that the work was happening, so we weren't prepared for it. And during that time it was understood that the main process challenge was around control and change, but we didn't really have a process in place to do that. And so I started with an assessment of where we were, and it's the very, very often used, where are we now, where do we want to be, and how do we get there approach. We had a system at that time that allowed us to log tickets, which was good, and we had some rudimentary reporting, which was of some use, but we didn't really have much other than that. So a lot of what I had to do in terms of assessment was anecdotal. And so we did some work to assess what we had and the maturity of those processes, and a lot of it was through consultation, talking to analysts, talking to some customers, and definitely trying to work out the history of how we've evolved to where we are and what's been tried in the past, what's worked, what hasn't worked, that sort of thing. The service catalogue, which was in draft, was in a good place, and so we just finished off that piece of work, integrated it into the system and launched it. We wanted to talk about ownership of services at that time, and that was a new concept for this organisation. And so when we did the service catalogue work, we brought in the roles of service owner from an IT point of view and service leads using a RACI model, which talks about accountability, which is the service owner, and responsibility, which are the service leads. That was brand new, and so we took a lot of time talking to the people who were to become the service owners in IT about what that really means in terms of their daily workload. And what we found was that the responsibilities that hadn't really been defined, they were doing it anyway. So all this was really doing was writing that down and making that very clear to people and setting expectations and putting a bit of transparency around that. That was that took a while, a few months to do that, and alongside that we wanted to look at an existing process that we knew was in place but wasn't really working very well, and so we chose the major incident process because we knew that a number of major incidents were occurring that were off the back of changes, and so we wanted to understand how to get that evidence so that would trigger the next step, which would be to do something about change management. So we brought in some work for the major incident management process, and the key thing that we wanted to do there was improve the way we report it, improve the transparency, and improve the communications around that. And I'll give you a little bit more information about that in a moment. Another thing that we wanted to do, there wasn't very much documentation around the existing processes that we actually did use, for example, incident and service request, and so we documented that as a start point just to get us ready to start with the improvement train for those things. Then came the big piece of work. We realised very quickly that the existing service management system was not going to be to lend itself to allowing us to grow and move forward in our plans. And once we understood that, we had some very clear choices. We could either replace it altogether, or we could go back to the beginning and do a new implementation of the existing tool. The problem that we had was that the existing tool at that time, because it had been so heavily customized, it couldn't be upgraded, and we were in a situation where we were several versions behind the current version, and the version we were on was not supported anymore. And so we took a decision to replace it altogether, and we went out to tender. And being in a university, that takes a very long time, and because of that, it slowed us down in terms of the work that we wanted to do. We ended up replacing the system. We started the project in 2012, and we managed to get it live by the early part of 2013. And looking back, it felt like a long process at the time, but now that I know a bit more about how the universities work, it actually was pretty quick. So, but it was a critical thing for us to be able to realise our ambitions along service management. So that came first. That's very much against the general trend where people would normally say good practice is to get your processes right first and then put the tool in around it, but we knew that we were constrained, and so we had to do it that way around. One of the things that we wanted to do with the service management system was to introduce self-service, which we had in an ad hoc kind of way before through things like web forms, but all of that fed into the system just via emails. It didn't really do much, and so we introduced the concept of an integrated self-service tool with our new service management system. And we took advantage of functionality that was available to us to measure customer satisfaction a bit differently, and we publish on our web pages to our customers our scores around customer satisfaction now. But the key thing was that once the tool was in place, we could then move into our new ITIL processes, and in particular we wanted to get in place change management and problem management, which is where we went first. And so a little bit about the processes themselves. Major incident management, we completely reviewed that from start to finish. And we talked about from how do you know what a major incident is, which is defined in the service catalogue under triggers for service outages and so on. How do people know that it's a major incident about a service? They do have this concept of anybody can make the call. So while the triggers are there to guide people, ultimately sometimes it's a judgment call, and anybody can say it. We have very specific roles and responsibilities once somebody has declared a major incident. The service owner then has to decide who's going to lead on that incident, and the incident lead then drafts in whoever else they want to help them resolve it. And the key role in there, other than the incident lead, is the communications lead, which was brand new for us. It took quite a long time for us to embed the concept of communications lead, and I think we're a good way there yet. There's still some work to do, I have to say, but it's getting much, much better. And the important thing around communications is setting expectations really for customers. If you can't tell them when it's going to be back, the best thing you can tell them is that you will tell them more information in whatever length of time you're going to tell them, and it helps them to work out what they're going to do with their day. And so we thought that that was really important. So the communications lead liaises between the incident team who are handling the incident and the service desk, who then trigger the communications out with customers. So they might send emails or post something on our web page, or we use social media, Twitter and so on. And that all comes from the communications lead. So our communications leads are sometimes technical people who give the information to the service desk around what's happening, and the service desk might interpret that into customer-friendly words that we'll be able to help the customers understand what we're doing and what we're working on. Once the incident is stood down, we send another communication out to tell everybody that we're in that position, and the next thing we do is set up a major incident review meeting. And that was a bit contentious early on, because it was always thought that those review meetings ended up uncovering people who were at fault if there was human error in the incident itself. And we worked incredibly hard, and we still do, to make sure that those meetings are completely no blame sessions. The idea is to learn lessons, what went well, what didn't go so well, what would we do differently next time, and we identify actions and recommendations off the back of those meetings. The actions are taken by people in the room, largely service desk, service process people, the people involved in the incident, including the service owner, and these are people who can actually do something about those actions. But sometimes we might have a recommendation for a bigger thing that might be for our directorate to work out whether or not we can afford to do a thing, or whether they want to make a policy decision. And so we have a function within the process that allows us to push those recommendations up to a senior management team meeting, and they have committed to reviewing those recommendations and coming back to the group with a decision about what they want to do. All of those actions and recommendations are logged and tracked, and they're managed through to conclusion with owners, which is a massive step forward from where we were. Moving on to change management, we did a massive amount of work on this, and we are constrained a little bit in that currently we don't have any commitment to having a change manager or a change management team. It's something that we're working on, but at the moment we don't have that. And so we've devolved responsibility and accountability for change management to service owners, with the overall process being owned within the section that I work in. And so within those defined accountability and responsibilities that I've mentioned there, we've separated the changes out into different sizes and impacts of change, and within each of those groups it's a different group responsible for the approvals of those changes. So for example, a very minor change with very low level impact and risk are approved by the person who's proposing the change in the first place. So for example, that might be a desktop support person who's been asked to install a low level piece of software on an individual's laptop, which doesn't make sense to have to go through multiple approval levels for that. The mid-level of significant changes are approved by the service owner, and the higher level of major changes goes to a virtual change approval board. And the change approval board has service desk representation in that, in the form of me, and that means that we make sure that the service desk are prepared for every major change that comes through. We try to make the process as low on administration as possible for the analysts who are using it. That's as much about hearts and minds as practicality. Because we know that introducing something like change management, which can be contentious, we don't want it to be a reason not to do it because it takes a long time to log a ticket, for example. There's too much information required, and so we try to make it as simple as we can. But the benefit is that it is auditable. We do get reports out of the system around the changes that we put in, the failed changes or the changes that are waiting for approval and so on. And we have KPIs around that, which is a huge step forward from where we were before. Problem management was done for a completely different reason, and that was because we found that we had what we called a big tail on our incident queue, and that was because incidents were being left open for longer than they needed to be because there were remedial actions to be taken later, which really is under the remit of problem management. And so we wanted to provide a mechanism for people to understand and work with the incident process in the way it's intended to do, along the lines of get it fixed quick, and get it to conclusion so that the service is back to where it was before the incident occurred, and then close that ticket or review it. And then problem management is there to take the longer view so that you can work out on workarounds and known errors and all of that good stuff within problem management separately to the incident management process. And that gives us some sensible major incident triggers that will fire off into problem management. So when we're in a major incident review, we discuss whether there are remedial actions to take, and we'll talk about log and problem tickets around that. It also gives us some decent management information around incidents now, because the incidents are actually incidents and not problem records. And so we now know about the length of time that incidents take to close, which we didn't really have before. Again, we've got defined accountability and responsibilities in there, and we have a good process that allows us to put things in around possible causes, and we can track around things like what we've tried and tested and hasn't worked, and the reasons why it hasn't worked, workarounds that do work, and the eventual root causes, and how we're going to go about fixing it if we are, and whether we're going to just live with it. That's really helpful, and from the service desk perspective, they can now look up in problem management and see what's going on with any given multiple incident scenario, which really does help. And again, of course, we can report on that. And so at the moment where we are, alongside of that, we've done the work with Service Desk Institute, and some of the stuff that we did was around the softer skills with the Service Desk, because we could do that then, and that was to align not just the intention of getting the nuts and bolts of how we do things correct, but kind of our softer approach in terms of what the customer experience and how we want customers to feel about the way we do things. And so we put all of our analysts through Service Desk analyst training, for example, and we wanted to spend a lot of time talking about communication, about transparency, and about being able to share information with our customers that we previously couldn't. The benefits of that sort of dual approach really helps us with transparency around service provision, both internally and externally, both with customers and the meetings that we might have from a business management perspective, but also internally within teams, because we were previously quite siloed, and now there's a whole lot more information around what we're working on, who's involved in a specific service, and all of the service leads get together now and talk about services in a more joined up way. So that's much, much better. Change planning and visibility is in the system, so everybody can see all the changes that are logged, and service transitions are handled in a much more controlled way, and the service desk is consulted very early on in that process now, which makes it much easier for them to plan. We are working constantly on building better metrics and reporting, but we do have something now that really is miles away from where we were before, which is really helpful. The key thing for us when we replaced our system was to be able to be self-sufficient. It was intended originally that we wanted to build our process capability, and that's definitely what we've got out of it. But the key thing for us from a service management point of view is we've got a team of 3 people, and we didn't want to have to be in a position where we leaned on consultants to be able to, for example, do an upgrade. And so it was a massive milestone for us in our first year when we upgraded the system completely on our own without any support. We were fantastically sort of overwhelmed by that feeling, and it got us to a position where we really thought we could see the possible out of the system, and we're in it for the long haul, so we know that we need to build on that, and being able to be self-sufficient was a critical point for us, so that was brilliant. In terms of common terminology, we do speak ITIL speak, but we don't talk about it in ITIL, what the book says. So we talk about incidents, we talk about resolutions, we talk about services, and we talk about change control, but it's part of common terminology now. Everybody talks the same language. We've offered ITIL Foundation courses to the department without pushing it. We now have people knocking on the door saying, please can I, rather than don't make me go. We've had over half the department now foundation trained, and the remainder, the vast majority of them, have had a one-day overview. In terms of collaboration between the teams across the IT service, when we first did the major incident reviews, we do the lessons learned bit at the end, what went well, what didn't go so well. And at the very beginning, the what went well invariably was, well, we talked to each other and we worked together, and it wasn't that great. It was a bit of a revelation. People didn't really have that as part of their day-to-day landscape prior to that. And so a lot more engagement and collaboration is happening these days, and partly, I think, because of the major incident process. And the important thing is that we're nowhere near the end of what we want to do. We absolutely are committed to improving the way we work, and almost daily we come up with an idea of something that we'd like to try. We have a wish list which we use on our periodic reviews, and that helps us to prioritise the work that we're going to do over the following year, and that continuous service improvement can be tracked. We can see where we've been and we can see where we want to go, and that's really important, I think. Other benefits, mainly for me, being, because I've got a vested interest in it, given that I manage those teams, the service desk and the cluster room support team are very much in the centre of all of these processes, making sure that they are prepared to be able to deal with any fallout, or making sure that they're prepared to handle any challenges that come out of any of the pieces of work that we do, including things like change management. Communications are getting better. And that's an ongoing process. I don't ever see an end to that, because I always think that you can do something to improve communications. And as appetites change in terms of things like use of social media, whether we use, I don't know, SMS messaging or whatever else we do, chat, there's always something new that we could be doing, and communications will always be at the forefront of what our improvement journey, I think. We have absolutely improved the quality of service provision to our customers, and we know that because we get really good feedback through our mechanisms that we've got in place now, and where we've gone from either not very much or the odd grumble to constantly and consistently good feedback. It's a fantastic place to be. And just last week, the customer feedback process comes through me, and last week when I reviewed all of the customer feedback for that week, without fail, every single piece of feedback was positive about our service desk, which was the first time, and it was fantastic. I was delighted by that. And so we have gone through the Service Desk Institute certification process. We were absolutely bowled over by the fact that, having gone through all of these pieces of work and continually tried to get better at what we do, and the intention was there, we thought we were getting better, but to get that 3-star award in 2014-15, it was amazing, and we're still absolutely buoyant as a team about that. That's just fantastic. And so we decided to finally bite the bullet and go in for the SDI awards in the past conference, and we were actually once again bowled over to be finalists in the Best Large Service Desk Award. So that was an absolutely fantastic accolade. Delighted by that. And that was really all I wanted to talk about with regards to our journey for now. So I'm open for questions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sharon. Thanks so much. And there's loads of questions that I could that I'd like to ask you actually. But thinking about sticking to time, what we'll do is I have got some listener questions here, so we'll get through as many of those as we can. So first of all, I've got one from Kieran who says that you mentioned pre-ITIL the service desk focused on fixing issues quickly, and post-ITIL, how did this change, and what were the end users' reactions?
Yeah, I think there are two sort of aspects to that. One is about prioritisation. There was a bit of kind of he who shouts loudest gets the most sort of attention sometimes, and I wouldn't say that was uniform, and it just needs to be kind of contextualised according to the type of query that it was. But in general, we didn't do a sort of more objective, prioritisation process. And so part of the incident work that we did was work with the teams to understand about managing their ticket queues, And having, for example, a simple thing like a queue monitor of the day within each of the teams who is responsible for prioritising and getting back to customers and telling customers, setting their expectations, or gathering more information if they needed it. Something as simple as that really has had a big impact.
Yeah.
From a customer's point of view, they do say that our communications are better now, and that setting expectations is definitely an important thing for them. And so I think that's been the biggest impact.
Okay, yeah, no, because I imagine what Kieran perhaps is in part getting at is that whenever there's any kind of change, there can be an initial sort of dubiousness, should I say, but we can tell from what you were saying at the end, you know, all your feedback, customer feedback has improved. So, you know, it's taking the long view as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not an overnight thing.
No. Just looking at what else is coming in here. So we've got one from John who's asking, do you track major incident follow-on action tasks in the tool?
Yes, not in the tool, no, we do it out with the tool, but it depends on what the task is. If it's something that relates specifically to a service, then we would log it in a tool. And one of the things I didn't say was that everything we log in the system is tied to a service. So the services are right in the center of everything that we do. And so if it was something that was an action that might be, I don't know, replace a bit of hardware, relating to a service or make a change within the service, then yes, that would be logged in the system as per the service request or change process or whatever it related to. And I've referred to the problem management side of it as well. But if it was something like it might be an education piece for a member of staff, for example, which might be a lesson learned, we wouldn't put that into the system, we would just do that separately.
Sure, okay, fantastic. We have actually had a whole new spate of questions coming in, and I know, Sharon, when I was talking to you earlier today, you were saying that perhaps we could get some of these questions to you after the webinar.
Yes, absolutely.
Following up, because that would be fantastic. So let's just go for one more quick one, and then we'll hand over to Andy. I know he's been patiently waiting there to get his presentation started. So let me just put one more to you then quickly. So Sue is asking about any tips you've got for getting teams to collaborate better particularly when things are changing and when there are new services introduced.
Well, I think the main thing I would suggest is what's in it for them. Why would they want to do that? It has to be attractive to them. It has to be a two-way street.
Yeah, of course.
And so for me, I think it depends on the scenario, but there's multiple reasons why it might be attractive for them. It could be that it makes their life easier in the long run. It could be that there are different skills or different aspects of the same skill in different teams, so they might bounce ideas off each other and get mutual benefit out of that. Or it could be that it would be they might have a mutual interest in a common service, but they have different aspects of that service that belong to them in terms of their responsibility. A good example of that, for example, in this organisation is SAP, where we've got a group of people who are responsible for delivering SAP, but we have obviously our back-end service and infrastructure that are handled by a different group, and they work very closely together because the common goal is to make that service do what it's supposed to do for our customers. And so it's just highlighting why it's a good thing. And encouraging that and facilitating that, making it happen for them, and sort of making sure that they can just go and do it themselves. You don't have to make it allowed. You just have to make sure that they know they can.
Yeah, okay, absolutely. Thank you so much for taking those questions, Sharon. And what we'll do now, we'll hand straight over to Andy. I'll let you introduce yourself and your role, Andy, if that's okay, and then go into your slides. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Zoe. Hi, everybody. Yes, so it's Andy Park from LANDESK. Yeah, I work as a solutions expert on the ITSM and ITAM side, and really knowing what Sharon was going to talk about, I thought I'd just throw in a few thoughts on the piece that really she's alluded to a lot. I mean, a lot of what she's mentioned is about the initial stages of reviewing what was in place when she came on board and making some major step changes. but it's an area which ITIL is very strong on. And what I wanted to do was kind of compare this to something that's a little bit close to my sad little heart about things that happen in sport. So the aggregation of marginal gains will become apparent in a moment. But we've all seen this, and we've all seen the bits in the middle, and it's the bit on the outside that's really important. And I think one of the things, just as an overriding comment about this, is continual service improvement starts the minute you start doing anything. It's not something that should happen at the end of a process. It should be there as we go along. You're always going to introduce significant changes, new systems and everything else. But CSI has to be in that space for you to make the changes you want to make and go on that, let's use the J word, the journey of improving your service. I mean, it's a fairly good statement. I always like the idea that it has CSI as well, because to me something of continual service improvement is about investigating things that aren't going right and finding the solutions for those. So I wanted to introduce you to one of my sporting heroes, who isn't actually a sportsman in his own right. Some of you may recognize this guy. He's Dave Brailsford. He's no longer involved in GB cycling. He's very much involved in Team Sky, but he's been pretty much single-handedly responsible for transforming British cycling globally. And this started off for quite a while back, sort of leading up to the Olympics. And now the annoying for most of the rest of the world, especially the French, the British domination of the Tour de France. But he has a very simple approach to what he wanted to do when he was put in post. And there's a few thoughts and concepts around that, and these are absolutely to any space and what we're talking about. I think the first thing you need to do is you need to have a team, and you need to have the right team, and you need to have that motivation. And Sharon was talking about the soft skills side of it and that understanding of what you're trying to achieve. If you don't have that, I think anything you try and do, and that's not just what we're talking about today, will struggle. That end goal, that belief that you can actually be something good. And you're absolutely right, the feeling of getting into that selection process for Best Service Desk, getting an award anyway there for one of the guys as the Best Service Desk Professional, all that type of stuff is really demonstrating the alignment of the people with the direction. If you're not going with that, you can have whatever software tool you like. It isn't going to make your life any better. Second one is, again, maybe a really obvious one. What do you want to try and do? What are your stated goals? These can be big, fancy ones. They can be very small ones. But it really is, again, that motivation and the clear understanding. Without that clear understanding, we're all going off in different directions. We need everybody heading in the right direction. The obvious, Sharon's already mentioned it, if you don't know where you are now, you don't know whether you've got anywhere. And that might be an unpleasant scenario to start with, but it certainly gives you, as you stand at the end of the journey looking back, you can really get a feel for where they are. And the guys here have come a long way from what I wasn't party to early on, but certainly the stuff Sharon's very passionate about, the real significant change in the quality. And they know where they are now, and more importantly, they know where they used to be, and that gap is a big, big gap in the right direction. And then we need to figure out how we want to do that. And that's about plans, and this is where CSI becomes a real part of that. And really the point for me about continual service improvement is Dave Brailsford's big statement that he made a little while ago, and that's the aggregation of marginal gains, which is really, in simple terms, doing it in baby steps. What he did and what made them so successful was, rather than trying to change one thing in a massive way, they went and looked at all the 1%. Where can I make a 1% change here? Where can I make a 1% change there? And they did it in a meticulous way. And the end result was, rather than having some massive challenge, actually the combination, as it says here, the aggregation of all these 1% meant that what ended up being now a almost dominant British cycling setup. And this is the same thing we apply with Service Desk. You don't have to do this in big steps. You can do this in baby steps. In actual fact, it works a lot better that way, because no one sits there being overwhelmed by the scale of maybe a problem. Knocking away at it very slowly with small pieces can make a massive difference quite quickly. To know that, you need to know your information, and you kind of need to have real information. And I have a real challenge with people when they want to produce data. I have a very simple question is that if you're not making a decision on the information you are gathering, then why are you bothering gathering that information? And to understand where you are and where you're getting to, you need to understand those changes. So as you lay out the path you want to go on, no matter what the activity is that you're going to carry out to achieve that improvement, you've always got to have a standard set of KPIs, set of reporting metrics, whatever they are, that you can call a reference and a reliable reference. Because part of what you might want to do might be investment. And investment is a difficult question in ITSM. Return on investment is not an easy thing to do. So statistics and information like that make a massive difference. A simple and very completely out of context from what it was meant for, but this is actually a very true statement. Once you measure something, you can change the behavior of the thing because you now have total understanding of it. So when you know whether your incidents are being managed in the right way, when you know how much time it's taking, then you can understand what makes it better. Is that appropriate? It really is quite a simple statement, but a very powerful one, which I think was kind of really captured about a very complex bit of physics. But in ITSM world, it's the same thing. If we understand what this is, we know how we can change it. A simple example of a scorecard, just something that says, I know whether I'm getting better or not. It's just one of those ideas. Reporting can be simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. Again, the point is I can look on this report scorecard and I can know where I need to be concentrating my next steps on. It's the red blocks. The green blocks mean I'm doing really well. The red blocks mean I've got to go and do something. So it is kind of one of those things where what you've got to try and do is focus in the right places. I think finally, just as I finish off, what we also need to recognize is that those ideas can come from everywhere. And what we're able to do is provide people with not just your IT organization, but the customer base as well. And I think continuous service improvement shouldn't be just around the result of a major incident review, for example. Clearly that has the scope for doing that. But you're guaranteed if you went to a service desk set of team and asked them the question, they'd all have thoughts and ideas on how to make the service desk better. So providing them with a mechanism by which they can do that as a parallel process to just the normal responsive mechanisms is also the case. Now obviously what we want to do there is we want to understand this, and part of using service improvement is understanding benefits and everything like that. And what you can see in a moment is just this idea of assessment. How good is this? It's a simple assessment which you can score, and then you can manage that queue. I might have stuff that I do straight away, I might have stuff in the queue that I review, but actually I've got this register of what it is, and I understand where things are, who owns them. The service owner is a critical part of that. Everything you log ties back to a service. But the other source of continuous service improvement is your customers. Why not give your guys out there, the people who to say, I grow the base in the delivery of the service desk, so they feel there's a buy-in there. There's a lot of responsiveness. I think that's something that sometimes we can be accused of in service management, is not being very customer focused from some areas, and I know that's always a challenge, keeping that communication. But if you're opening up channels like this where what you're actually saying is, you know what guys, you can contribute to that improvement process, then I think that's a really powerful thing. We can manage it, we can control it, and we can feed back to those customers that that's a really great thing. So those are just a few of my thoughts around how we actually manage that and some of those things. And I just wanted to kind of finish with these final few thoughts, which is you've got to understand where you're going. You've got to make sure you can measure what you're doing. You've got to have that team around you that's motivated. Remember that ideas can come from anywhere. They could be very left field ideas, but they should all be reviewed, because you never know what clever idea comes from somewhere which you hadn't thought of but actually makes a big difference. And that kind of final statement for me is, just understanding that really what we're trying to do, and the best way to approach this, is little pieces of improvement. Lots of those actually give you a much more tangible feeling of moving forward than trying to sort of eat the apple in one go. It's not possible sometimes, but most of the time you want to eat it in little bites and achieve it that way. So it's just some thoughts around continuous service improvement, how you might approach it. and really that idea of, you know, it's not just the start point. This is really, the name is continuous. It is all the time, and we should be embedding that into whatever system we use and whatever business processes we put around managing ITSM. Service improvement is what we do. We don't survive as service management, as service delivery people if we're not moving. Some of those are big moves, some of those can be minor ones, but it's a really important part of how we deliver service. So thanks very much. That's my my little slot up. I don't know if Zoe's got any questions for me, but back to you.
Thank you, fantastic. Thank you for that. I've got one sort of myself really. I was thinking about when you were talking, going back to thinking about the measuring and reporting and only sort of only measuring things that you're going to actually use basically. I was thinking how much of that should be led by other areas of the business in terms of what they say they will need or use, and how much do you think the service desk should keep that kind of control, if you like, over what they decide to put out?
So I think the answer to that goes back to that wonderful magical ITIL concept of the service. If you're really driving that as a proper concept, then the business is telling you how they want a service delivered because it's a consultation process. And the measurement of how the quality of that service is being delivered is a combination of IT and the business. I think there are internal IT things that will always be useful to them. But in the bigger, wider concept of the stakeholders who are using the services, who are your customers, it is being able to track and measure the things that impact their quality of service. So it is a combination of the two. Some are internal, but I would always say that overriding mindset should be what we do should only be there to support the business. And every activity we carry out is there to deliver a service to a bit or an entire part of the business. So that would be how I see it.
Okay, all right, yeah. So it's definitely that sort of together approach.
Absolutely.
And thinking about, I mean, you've obviously, you know, you've seen some of the same things at lots of different organisations and different service desks. Is there anything you can put your finger on in terms of the main barriers, if you like, to organisations getting this kind of thing right? Because, you know, you do hear some of the same themes, if you like, coming up in presentations and training and blogs and things like that. You know, why is it that it's still so difficult for some people to get these things in place in terms of, you know, separate problem management process?
Yeah,
separate.
I think that the difficulty comes from, and I think this falls into things like problem management as well. We find it very easy to execute activities like incident request and change, which have quite a high degree of finite timescale to them.
Yes, yeah.
You know when if you've got an SLA incident, you know when that incident's going to breach. Therefore, you've got timescale. You have a change which has a changed release date, so there's that. Requests are the same. When you hit things like service improvement and problem management, it's a softer set of approaches because you may take time to do that, and it's not a time you can accurately quantify.
Yeah, and
so I think a lot of the time the challenge that a lot of organizations have is, can you go away for a week and do this thing, and we might actually make you do it for 2 weeks, but that doesn't work within the wider scope. So I always feel like if you're going to achieve this, you do have to look at how the organizational structure of the teams is there. You've got to acknowledge that a person or more, depending on the benefit of the work being done, needs to come out of maybe the frontline support. But again, it's that idea of being able to quantify it, which is the challenge, I think, for most people. It's easy to say, have a day out and be back in tomorrow.
Yeah.
But you could argue in some cases that there's a benefit, that there's a valid state for saying, go away and fix this and don't come back till you do. Now, if they're still away in a year's time, that's a challenge. So I think it's that space mainly is structuring it and understanding that slightly more, not random, but it's a more variable nature of time frames that these things might have.
Yeah, of course, and I guess as we were talking about earlier, taking the long view, you know, talking about what the eventual benefits are going to be and how much more, what a greater effect that will have as a whole.
It's getting out of that. Yeah, it's getting out of that reactive and proactive, and somewhere in that you have to accept that you might have to take a hit. You know, if you take someone out of the front line, that's a body you're not employing to do incident management. And in the short term, there could be a dip. but that longer term view is actually that the work they do will start to reduce the number of incidents, and you could argue if it's a very significant piece of work, they're almost engineering themselves out of needing to be on the front line anymore because they've reduced the amount of inbound. So it is that type of thing, it's that challenge and that dip initially, but it will come back, and having faith and trust that it will.
And I think that brings us back nicely full circle to what Sharon was talking about in terms of you know, the eventual payoff and the actual, you know, having faith in that whole process and seeing where it can lead you in the end. And I think that's why it's really important to hear these kind of case studies and how other people have managed it and actually, you know, had successes and where it's taken them. So I want to say thank you to both of you again for some really brilliant points today.
You're welcome.
No problem.
And thanks for taking part. And as I say, we'll get these extra listeners' questions over to you, Sharon, for some following up on that afterwards, and hopefully get that onto a blog for everyone to have a look back at in the next couple of weeks.
Yes, thanks.
Brilliant.
Okay, all right. So thanks again, everyone. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back later in May with our next webinar, which is all about service brokering. So if you haven't signed up for that one yet, that should be a good one too. So thanks very much. Bye guys, we'll speak to you soon.